Good morning, everyone. I'm Anthony Starr, and I have the pleasure of serving as the president of SERDI. This is the third online session we are holding since we were unable to have our annual conference in person in Georgia earlier this year.
Hey, everybody.
On behalf of the SERDI Council of Peers, I welcome you. Ongoing professional development is key to us remaining effective as executive directors, and our effectiveness is key for the success of our organizations. SERDI is your organization dedicated to your interest and your support and your professional development as an executive director. I'd like to thank Martha Heater and Plan RVA for hosting the Zoom session today. And today's session will be recorded and posted on the SERDI website in the coming days. Now, for our session and our speaker, Erica Allison. Erica is the founder and CEO of Formation PR Brand, a full-service PR and branding firm located in Western North Carolina. This 13-year-old firm provides laser-focused PR and branding services to clients in the fields of healthcare, higher education, nonprofit management, and regional planning. Erica is the lead PR strategist and crisis communication expert for her team. She also sets the tone for branding campaigns, writes communication plans, and routinely speaks at workshops and conferences about PR, crisis communications, social media strategy, and branding. She is no stranger to SERDI and our regional organizations. She led sessions at our SERDI fly-in on marketing last year, and she is a regular presenter at NATO conferences and events as well. So she's going to start presenting here in just a moment. If you have questions, you're welcome to ask them. You may also post questions using the chat feature here on Zoom, and Erica will get to them as the timing is appropriate, but feel free to chime in and interject and ask questions. If she's going to answer a question shortly, she'll hold off maybe on answering some of those, but feel free to chime in and ask those questions. And without any further delay, I'll turn it over to Erica. Thanks for joining us today and presenting.
Thank you, Anthony, making sure I'm not muted. Oh God, Dana, don't do that. What are you doing? I'm happy to see at least two faces. I see a lot of names I recognize, but I'm missing a lot of faces. So you're always welcome to turn on your camera so I can see you, because I do miss seeing you people in person. This strange world that we're in, we're all adapting, and this is what we do now. I'm not going to say it's our new normal. I hate that phrase, but it is where we are and what we're doing. So some of you may be managing school children also in the background online. Seems to be what many of us are doing, but I am looking forward to spending some time with you, about an hour and a half. Sounds like we still have some people coming in. As Anthony said, I've got my chat feature open. So if you have a question as I'm going along, oh, there's Scott, then please chime in, type it in the chat feature, and I'll get to it. And there's actually going to be moments where I'm going to want you to speak and talk as well. So just know you'll need to check and see if you're muted or not, and unmute, and hopefully you'll participate, because otherwise no one just wants to be talked to for an hour and a half. I don't anyway. So hopefully you'll interact with me and we'll have a good session together. So I am going to introduce myself just a little more to people that may not know me. Erica Allison. We did cover that already with Formation PR and Brand. And I have been working with councils of governments, planning and development commissions, all the acronyms and alphabet that you all love and adore. I do as well. And I've been working with you all for, I think, well over a decade now, and really enjoy doing it. And whenever I hire people to join my team, I make sure they also understand what you do and the value that you provide to communities and regions throughout our country. I think that what you do matters, and it's important to me and my team that we take on your work whenever we do it, whether it's communication strategy, branding work, PR work. We do it because we want to make sure your value is known to the people in your region so that you stay around and that you are relevant. I just briefly will bring up my organization's mission. We rebranded in 2018, and became Formation PR and Brand. But before we could do that, we had to really land on what our mission is. And it's everything to do with our brand story as well. And you'll hear me talking about that in this session. But it's important to us that we uphold this whenever we take on a client or we're considering working with one, that we're really in tune to who they are. We listen to what they want, what they're trying to accomplish in order to create meaningful work. So along the way, we're able to empower them to do some of this work. If you've heard one of my sessions before, and there's one on Tuesday on social media for executive directors, it's really important to me that you all know how to do this work. It'd be great. I mean, that I'm working myself out of a job a lot of times when I train you how to do it, because then you don't need us anymore. But that's my goal. I don't want you to rely on someone else to do your social media or to understand your marketing and try and continue to have a strategy. I want you all to do that. So it's important to me that we empower our clients along the way so that together we can have a meaningful impact in the world around us. So I know that sounds kind of mushy, but it's true. It's what we do. And so it's why we love working with folks like you. So without further ado, I'm really excited about the theme of our slide deck today. I always come up with an outline for these workshops, and then I sit with our creative director and we come up slide by slide. We develop what these look like, because especially now more than ever with a virtual session, it's got to make an impact, and it's got to at least be entertaining. If nothing else, I want you to laugh at some of these slides as we go through the day. So I went with more of a vintage nostalgic vibe because it was comfortable. And right now we all need a little comfort in our lives and not so much turmoil. So taking a deeper dive into key aspects of marketing and communications. We're going to cover community engagement and how you all go about doing that and ideal ways to do that, and then internal policy management, making sure that once you set the tone and the goals for your marketing and communications, you're managing it internally, because I'm sure you've all, or if you haven't yet, you will experience a situation where someone on your team just inadvertently or very innocently may take that brand story or your message in a slightly different direction, and off she goes. And then you have to do a little damage control. So it's helpful to know how to manage that. And we'll go over that in the session as well. So what are our goals? My goal is to keep this Zoom meeting going and not have any technical difficulties. That's one of them. My goal is to also convey useful, relevant information for you all. Are there any goals or outcomes that you want to have from this workshop? Some of you may have taken my pre-workshop survey. It's more for the social media session than this one, but I did glean some information from it for this one. But if anyone has anything they'd like to chime in on or put in the chat feature, that would be great to know what your goals are for this session. I'm looking, I don't see anyone. Scott, I'll put you on the, well, there's two Scotts, aren't there? Scott Farmer and Scott Coons. I'll put you on the spot. What are some goals that you all have? And Anthony gave ID common mistakes to avoid. Okay, can do that. All right, well, hopefully we will cover what you need. So first, I'm going to get right into community engagement. I love this. Looks like we're all at a cocktail party and we're having a great time. So community engagement. How are you going about positively and meaningfully engaging your community, and even why should you? And what are the steps to get there? So I like to say we need to start with a look inside. Take a look in the mirror. And this is where you have a little exercise. So you either need a piece of paper and a pen or type on your computer. But I want you to think about, who are you as an organization? What do you represent? So what's your brand story? If you had to tell someone what you do or what your brand story is, I would like you to be able to just jot that down or think about it. Who do you represent? And go ahead and write that down. For, I think all of you, it's local government as well as your community members, but there are some finite constituents in there as well. And then to help develop a brand story, I'm going to get you to write down right now 3 words that describe your core values as an organization. So core values as an organization. I'm getting some more outcomes for the session. Thank you everyone for typing those in. Next, write down 3 or more words that define your areas of expertise. So that could be aging, economic development, infrastructure, transportation planning, whatever your areas of expertise are, GIS, throw those in as well. And then as we continue to look in that mirror, I want you to write down 3 words that your supporters would use to describe you. And they should know who you are and what you're doing, so that shouldn't be too hard. And then I'd like you to think about writing down what your naysayers or those who don't fully understand you, what would they say about you? What 3 words or what phrasing would they use to describe you? And of those last 2, the supporters versus the naysayers or people that don't understand you, which one's easier for you to come up with? And sometimes we may not know. I think sometimes we get in an echo chamber or a really comfortable bubble and we think everybody might like us or understand us, but even our supporters may not fully understand us. Scott, you said the supporter list was easier. Yeah, it should be. Those folks should know what you're all about. And our naysayers, none of us like to think that someone doesn't care for us or our work. And so why would we want to spend time thinking about that? But it's important to think about that so that we can know how to engage them and how to win them over. Perhaps there's something that we're going to need their assistance on in the future. That was our slide there for who are you. So then after we take a look at who we are and take a look in the mirror, then it's a time for us to take a look outside. And that's where I was leading you into with who are your naysayers. So I want you to think about who you're trying to reach, who you're trying to communicate with, and who you're trying to influence. Those are a little different. So reach might be you just want to reach out to folks for input on a project. A lot of you said that's how you use social media. Or you want to communicate with someone to let them know about that project or about your services. Or you might want to influence someone to get them on board to help push forward a project. So think about who those folks are. And then write that down. Maybe it's the naysayers. Maybe it's your existing constituents. Is there a group or a sector that you're missing that you haven't connected with? And when you're thinking about those groups and who they are, do you know what they support or what they believe in or aspire to? That's where you have to do a little research. All right, now the question is, are the 2 aligned? is your core value and your understanding of who you are and what your brand story is all about, is it in alignment with the people you're trying to reach or communicate with or influence? How many of you would be able to say that those two are in sync? And I see some people popping on video. That means you want to talk to me, doesn't it? So any aha moments in those lists that you're generating? Are there some folks you think I need to figure out a way to reach them? And keep in mind, you don't have to reach them yourself. You could have people within your sphere of influence. You could have people within your supporters that can connect you with those groups or be your ambassador, be your brand ambassador.
Erica, I would say I was having trouble coming up with what the naysayers would say about us. Not that I don't think they're out there, but I realized I haven't given maybe enough thought to what they might be saying and understanding that. So maybe I need to look a little further out and figure out what that is, what that narrative is.
I think that's a very valuable realization that you made there. And I would say others probably are making that as well, because we don't want to think about what the naysayers said. And unfortunately, in this climate that we're in right now, everyone is firmly in their lane and in their camp, and there's not a lot of crossing over or discussion. And that's where there's real opportunity, especially for you when you're establishing your value and relevance in the world. I think that it's important to understand what are those perceptions, what are those issues or thoughts that people may have about your organization. And it's like a SWOT analysis. You're looking at your opportunities and your threats, and you're trying to figure out what can I do to put up some walls to protect the organization, and or what can I do to not have a wall, but extend an invitation to that person or that entity to learn more. And that's where it gets a little challenging, but that's where you need to do an evaluation of those groups and determine, are they ever even going to want to know about us? Are they ever going to want to talk to us? And if there's any glimmer or thought that they would, or maybe you do something that benefits their constituency, then yes, there is some opportunity there to connect and make that connection happen. And that you're going to hear me talking a lot about your value. It's important to me that you all not only understand and know your value, but you understand how to communicate it to others and get it out there in a way that is not self-promotional, because I know many of you just, want to avoid self-promotion at all cost. And my goal is to get you to put that down a little bit and understand that it's not self-promotion. It's more about communicating your value. It's more about making sure people understand what you bring to the region. Okay, here's a good one. Stacy said she realizes that our supporters and naysayers would both say we are confusing and too technical. I've heard that before, yes. It's important to scrub your language a little bit and bring it down to a relatable level. What's in it for people in your community? Why should they care? Take it out of that technical realm and put it into a human interest story realm. How did it help the little lady down the street? How did it help that young man get to work? How did it help retrain someone who may have come out of the prison system and now they're contributing to society? There are all kinds of different ways you can tell that story. And Nathan brings up a good point. Indifference is as great a threat as haters. So yeah, even if they're not outright hating you, but they just don't know you or care about you, you're missing the opportunity to establish relevance and value and communicate that to them. And you don't have to shove it down their throat. This is almost like a slow drip or a lengthy process. Think about any of your constituents or your supporters that you have. They weren't instant fans. Nobody is an instant fan unless you're giving them money. Sometimes they are. But if you are truly winning over those long-term fans and sustainable allies, it takes time. It takes, real friend building. I have a senior in high school now, hard to believe, and a 7th grade girl. And the 7th grade girl is where we're entering that realm of, to be a friend, you've got to or to have friends, you've got to be a friend. So it's that same concept. It's not anything new. I'm not developing any new concepts here. It's all about trying to find that win-win for both the naysayers and the people that might be indifferent, and educating them about that. And it's not easy to do, but there is a way to do it. So let's talk about your strategy. We've been playing a lot of cards lately, so this is why this one popped up. Love a good game of cards. So you have to have a strategy. You have to think ahead. You have to be thinking about what is the other person, what's their move going to be, and how can you help or hurt or block that. And for your work, I've already sort of planted this seed. It's about knowing your value. And so when you look back at those words that describe your core values and words that define your areas of expertise, could you jot down some of that in the chat feature for me? And let me see what that is, because when we start looking at that value, that's when we begin to develop our brand story. And that's when we begin to have our talking points, because it's really about your talking points. I know all of us can get guilty of being in our own world and not being able to explain to people what we do. Sometimes when people ask me about PR, it's like a foreign concept when you're talking about public relations. And I say, well, it's really about making sure we get positive stories out about this person, or we're managing any potential negative stories. We're trying to make sure our audience understands who we are. And that's a lot of what you're doing. So anybody typing in the chat feature there? There we go. A flexible resource in multiple disciplines. Yes, you are. And you are sounding a little technical on the disciplines part, I'm going to say. So what disciplines would we have there? You are a flexible resource. And I think flexible, responsive, nimble, even embracing an entrepreneur mindset where you are trend watching, you're trend spotting, and you're trying to anticipate what's ahead. You all know what's going to happen a lot of times with legislation before many people in your communities will, and you're able to anticipate what's going to happen, and you can start to plan ahead. Now, of course, you have grant requirements and things to work within, but being nimble, flexible resource, that's awesome. Communication, facilitation, yes. Collaboration and resourcefulness, regional convener, experts in several areas to serve local governments, yes. Service provider, convener of people, neutral space to bring decision makers together. I've heard that a lot over the years, a neutral space, and I think that is something that people could really appreciate right now. You are a neutral space. You have multiple government entities that you answer to. You have elected officials on your boards, and if you can always hold true to that value of being neutral and convening people in a neutral, safe space, I think you are going to win some people over. It's a nuanced idea that maybe is lacking right now. Do you think people get convener? Don't you think they do? Convener, bringing people together, collaborator. I think if across the board, all the cogs that we've worked with and PDCs, that is one of the tenets. That's one of the essence of your value, is able to convene people, and it is in a neutral space, and you're a resource. I've also heard the phrasing of extension of government services, or an adjunct, or part of their department, or you fill in where perhaps the local government doesn't have the resource to do that. GIS and data, for example, or transportation planning. You're saving money. A lot of times that translates into cost savings for your communities. And so anytime we want to really hit local people and people that don't know your world, it's talking about their wallets and their pocketbooks and jobs. Those are super important to people. Jobs, job creation, job training, and then as far as how you're saving money. So I had told Anthony and some others when I first started this work a while back, it was right when the Tea Party was coming into existence. And I tell you what, I earned my stripes then, because you all were on the chopping block, and I made it my mission to make you valuable and relevant. And you already were, but when I say that, what I mean is communicate that value and relevance, because you were very much like demure and in the background, and no, we don't want to tell people what we're doing. We're back here. It's everybody else that's doing it. And we're convening, and that's great. But at some point we've got to step out of and add to. We convene, but you know what? We also make things happen. We bring funds into this community and start looking at it as through the lens of, if we weren't here, what would have not happened? If we weren't here, this road would not have happened. This water and sewer, extension wouldn't have happened. Thinking about it that way, that's when you begin to have an understanding that you can communicate your value in a way that doesn't take away from anyone else at all. You're the facilitator, you're the convener, and you're the partner. So when you're talking about knowing your value, here's where it can start to break down just a little bit, is making sure your staff understands that as well. So surveying your staff, seeing if they understand the value or what they would say about your value. SurveyMonkey is a very easy tool to use. Survey your constituents. Do a customer service survey. It seems like I've worked with someone that did that. Was that Land of Sky that you did? Yeah, I thought so. Where you reached out to your partners that you are providing a service to. How are we doing? What can we do better? Dana, did you get positive feedback from actually just even doing that survey and asking?
Yeah, I think they were more impressed with the fact that we wanted to know what was going to be on our report card, I guess, than actually just doing the work. They were really impressed by that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, even just asking, hey, how are we doing? Can we do anything differently? Or what can we do more of? You might be surprised. They might want you to do something more than you're already doing. And if some of you are moving into that fee-for-service realm, that could then bring in some lines of revenue. So I think that's one way you can start to know your value and establish that. But also, as we've said before, knowing your audience, not just your fans, but potential threats, people that might be indifferent to you or might not know what's happening. I think, now until the end of the year is a very tenuous time for everyone. The political climate is, of course, I don't have to tell you, it's pretty dull. No, it's pretty exciting right now. And I think now more than ever is a really good time to make sure you know who your audiences are and are communicating value in a way that is relevant to them. And, there are a lot of ways you can do that. The social media discussion is on Tuesday. That is one. But there's also email marketing. Scott, I know you do that with isothermal. And your constituents actually will find you on the street and say it didn't arrive at 3 o'clock, it was 3:05, what happened? So I think that you're establishing relevance that way when you're delivering value. You're delivering something to them that helps them in their work. And then, as I mentioned, finding your balance there between sharing your value and self-promotion. Are many of you worried about overly promoting your organization or feeling like that's not the appropriate approach that you need to be taking? And you can just write it in the chat feature there. Or do you feel like that's okay?
Since I'm new, Erica, relatively still, I think some of the old school thinking was that we were supposed to be behind our membership, not necessarily even with or out front. We'll use those terms. So I think in this transition, it's a question of, with our communication, with our value, with our propositions, how far out in front or behind do we get? So it's that nuance type of thing.
And that's where you all excel, because your local government partners, when they want to take the credit, when they want to make a big announcement, and that's totally appropriate and within what is to be expected. But what I also want to encourage is, let's say they make a big announcement, but you're instrumental in that, and maybe you're there on the podium or with them as they do it, or in the press release, perhaps someone is quoted, or once that news is out there, you take it and you share it with your constituents. We're so proud and so happy to be a part of this process. Here's how we're supporting their efforts. That could be one way. But then I mentioned also making sure you find the human essence story of it. So maybe you don't say anything right at the beginning of some big announcement or some rollout, but later on, as your work evolves, you are then able to find that human interest story. And we do this a lot with COGS when we're working on their annual reports. We're always asking for them to find the human interest story, find the person that's been affected, find the tug at your heartstrings story. Putting that in your annual report is one way to do that. Making sure your annual report is online and then sharing it with some folks who may not know anything about you. It's another way to communicate that. And it's not overly promoting, it's showing, here's the hard work we've done, here's the money we brought in, because that's always in that annual report, how many grants you brought down. And then here's how we're bringing that home to a local level. And then if you're able to communicate that via a press release, or not even a press release, but sharing maybe that person's story with the local press. But when you do that, making sure the local government, if they're part of that scenario, making sure you've communicated with them and say, hey, we want to share this story. Who on your team would be a good resource for the media? Who on your team can we also put forward? And so you then become very valuable to them as well, because you're helping to get their message out and share some spotlight on them. But I am sensitive to that. Oh, let me see. I've got some chats here. Nathan says he sends out too many emails, so probably overwhelm local governments and partners. So Nathan, are you using, is it a personal email, or are you using a platform like Constant Contact or MailChimp? And you can, if Dana, you know, you can say it. She said, yes, he does. I will say, because I live here, Nathan is a communicator for sure, in a variety of ways. Social media, I have not gotten your emails, Nathan, so that's okay. Don't add me, but I'm keeping up with you. Don't you worry. But if you're able to use a platform like that, you could track it and see who's not opening or what your open rate is. And then you could begin to trim your cadence down a little more. Or maybe it's a brief email like, hey, here's a big update for a new opportunity for funding rolling out, or here's something like that. But I would say you don't want to overwhelm, and you don't want them to go, oh, there's another email, and not open it. So I think it is important to find some balance in that cadence, and make sure that we're giving credit. He's going to add me. Oh no. Both personal and Constant Contact is what Nathan is using. So Nathan, you should be able to see in Constant Contact what your open rates are like if people are unsubscribing. Hopefully they're not. And what I hope you're doing is within those emails, you're putting some links back to your website, or you're putting some links to information, and then you can tell what people are clicking on. And that also is another indication of what they're interested in. I think over and over, people are interested in money and funding and opportunities for their constituents. So anytime you can share those kind of updates, that's amazing as well. And people really appreciate that. Okay. So I don't know if I answered any or helped you with that, but it is a balance. It's trying to make sure that you are not stepping on your local government toes. And I don't have to tell you all how to do that. You know how to do that, but it's where I think we could help lift up your organization more, is just in piggybacking on whatever news they might be sharing that is relevant to you, or finding that human interest story. Those are some tips that help continue to share your value. And if you are doing emails, maybe it's a monthly email where you're sharing recent impact. I think people like to understand what your impact has been. How has this particular grant impacted their community? How has this particular program impacted these folks? And again, framing it as, in your mind, if we weren't here, what wouldn't have happened? And so we're so glad we're able to be here and do this and make a difference in the lives of these people. Any questions in that area? Looks like somebody unsubscribed from a neighbor here. Sorry, Scott. Let's see. Open rate is around 20 to 25%. That's good. We do get lots of unsubscribes when we send email out to 20,000 job seekers registered. Yeah, I would imagine so. That's a hard one because it's just kind of almost like a spam thing at that point. I like the impact report released each month that's data driven and a newsletter that is story based. That's very interesting, Anthony. Who's doing that in your office?
We have a full-time communication specialist that puts that together. Been one of the best investments that we made a few years back. And one of the things that I did when we created the position is I didn't have enough indirect funds to pay for it. So I made each of the departments chime in and pay for it so that they would be engaged and have ownership into making sure content was being fed to the person, so that if they're paying for a portion of his salary, they want to get their money back out of him. So that was kind of my approach. It's worked great. That's
great. I know that is a question I get asked a lot, is how would I pay for that communication specialist? How can I make this happen? Did you all hear that answer from Anthony about how he makes that happen? And is that a possibility? Yes, maybe no. I think it's worth exploring. I know a lot of you do it yourselves, which is hard, or you have maybe one or two other people that you're kind of cobbling it together. And what happens, as we'll see when I talk about tools here, is it's not always a consistent brand message, story, or voice. And that's where it's important when we're trying to establish value and relevance, is making sure it's consistent. So let's talk a little bit about some of the tools that might help you with that. So this is your super fantastic logo. This logo I bring up because I want to make sure when you look back on what you wrote about your brand story, about your value, your core values, your areas of expertise, and what people know you for, does your logo match what you wrote down? And Dana, you better say it does. If it doesn't, and I know a lot of you are at least 50 years old. I just turned 50 last week. Sometimes you need an update. So I think that it might be time for an update if you haven't looked at that in a while, because some of you, when you began at least 50 years ago, it was a different climate, different world. You were doing different things. Today, you've got to be relevant, and you've got to, that logo does mean something. When people are looking online for you, or they're looking at your brochure or your letterhead, or they're looking at anything on social media, if your logo looks like it's from 1970 or around that area, then they're going to wonder, is this really an up-to-date organization? And how is that really conveying your value and your brand? So it is important to make sure you at least take a look at that. With the brand story, I know you'll get tired of me talking about it, but here's your brand story: economic powerhouse. Does everyone, yes, Kirk, sorry, I'm going to break back to logos. I cannot say this enough. Yes. A lot of COG logos reflect geography, because when you started, it was really important for everybody to know all those counties. Now, people do not want to see that in your logo. It does not need to have all the counties and the geography. It needs to convey what you represent. Is it hope? Is it economic development? Is it optimism? Is it a resource? Anthony, tired logos convey a tired organization. Yes, I would agree. And I know for some folks, you think, I don't want to spend budget on this, or what does it matter? It's just a logo. But it does all work together when you're talking about marketing and communications to represent who you are and what you're about. And if it does look tired and dated, people may not think you've got the the relevance for where we are today. And so I often think and tell a lot of people when I'm training my staff on who you are and what you do, that you are an economic powerhouse and you are a partner in economic development, and you do make that sort of impact. That brand story needs to sync up with what that logo looks like. But when I talk about a brand story, it's more than just your logo. It's who are you? What do people think of about you when they hear your name or see your logo? What are they thinking? What does it mean to them? Does it mean, oh, they're just some sort of quasi-government entity, or they're the government, or they're really innovative, they're responsive, they're nimble? You know, it needs to look like you are ready to do business and you can help them. And then also in that brand story, does everyone know it within your organization? And that's where it takes a little more time to make sure they do. Another tool there is making sure that your messaging and talking points are supporting all of that, but you constantly update those to make sure it's relevant to the climate that we're in, to make sure that it's relevant to the political nature that we're in, and make sure that your employees all have them. Dana, your logo, it does reflect your geography, but in a subtle way, by showing the mountains. Within Land of Sky, we have several departmental logos that all are branded in the same fashion as the overall organization's logo. Yes, that is something that in our years working with COGS, we've noticed there are always sub-logos for every entity or every effort within the COG. And we try to dissuade people from doing too many of those because it can get a little confusing for your communities. If you are going to do those, I like what Land of Sky has done. They all look like they're in the same family, and I know you're sometimes strapped with aging. It depends on which state you're in and what that has to look like. So I understand you have some constraints there, but there are ways around that where we can look at trying to unify all of those sub logos, and then think about, well, wait a minute, if I have too much of a defined logo for transportation or for aging, and we've encountered this with one of our COG clients, does anyone in the community even know that that aging department is part of that COG? And sometimes they don't. And so then you're missing an opportunity to establish value and relevance for your overall organization. So it's important to make sure that whether it's aging or economic development or transportation, I know the workforce development boards, a lot of those have their own defined name, logo, but making sure there's at least some font treatment, or there's some, there are words that refer back to your organization so that everybody knows it's all part of the same organization, because there are constituents in your region and communities that will only ever know that one department or that one service from your COG. Very rarely are they going to experience all of them. They actually do just by living where they live, but they don't know that. And so making sure that your staff is communicating that I work for this organization, but I'm in charge of this entity or this department or this service is very, very important. And making sure, and that's where messaging and talking points come into play, and making sure that there's an awareness within your organization. And I know for some of you, you might have a very large organization. It might be hard for everybody to hear stories from everybody's department, but having sharing, I think Southwestern Commission does this at every one of their staff meetings. One department will share a success story or a human interest story or some sort of positive outcome, so that everyone can hear how that how the organization spans and reaches out beyond just that one area. Do others of you do things like that to make sure your internal staff knows more about the overall picture? In case anybody wants to type. We do that. Yes, good. Stacy, where are you? What's your COG? I'm waiting for typing. While she's typing, another tool in your toolbox, collateral. This means your business cards, any sort of mugs you give out, any brochures, any stickers, your vehicle wraps. A lot of you have vehicle wraps. George Washington Regional Commission. Thank you. A lot of you might have, I mean, even signage, all of that has to sync up. All of it has to be consistent and look like the brand story and represent you in a very positive way. And then finally, one of my favorites, public relations, but that's where sometimes people struggle with how to make that happen, especially if you don't have someone in-house working on PR or you're unsure what to put forward. That's when, if you're sharing, and Anthony, you said you have a rotation where staff share monthly staff meetings about their program with all other staff. In that sharing, if you hear a nugget of, oh, that sounds interesting, and put it through the lens of your neighbor or your mom or your kid's teacher, would they want to hear some story like this? Would it make a difference to them if they heard this story about the impact that you're making? If you think, yeah, that would be interesting to them, that could be something that you could work on sharing with the media, or you don't even have to share it with the media. If you have your monthly newsletter, putting it in your monthly newsletter, perhaps put the media on your monthly newsletter distribution list and share that. And then they might read it and say, oh, I'd like to know more about that. Because right now, most everyone in the media, the journalists that we work with, yes, they're still writing about COVID, but they're also really tired of writing about COVID, and they would like a little happy story every once in a while. And they also have very short staff on a lot of local newspaper outlets. So you doing a little bit of that legwork for them, and you don't even have to write it. I can send out a press release template for you. I can send out some helpful tips if you all want it. You've got my email. I'll give that to you. I will be happy to share that with you, and you can just put the information in there. They're going to finesse it and put it in. But the point is, make sure you're harvesting stories. Make sure you're looking for those stories. Any questions there before we move into policy management? This is where we take all of that information I just talked about and make sure that internally you're managing the message, because when I handle crisis communications, usually if something happens that someone calls me in for, my first line of defense is always staff. If you can make sure that your staff has the information they need to understand and ward off any sort of questions, because trust me, they will talk. That's the first person that we need to educate, in addition to your board and things of that nature. But when it's not a crisis happening, just your regular brand story, your logo, any of that, we really have to make sure that your staff understands the message. And it does take time, but maybe it's, once a month you go over the brand story, or you go over messaging and talking points. If you have a SharePoint or server where they can access it, making sure they have those. Looking at your brand position and statements. So we love to create brand positions and statements, help our clients do that. And basically what that is the position you seek to own in the market. So as you're within your region, what is that position you want to put your flag in the sand on? And then to solidify that position, your brand has to identify, promote, and embody the benefits that your target market associates with your brand. So you've got to live, breathe, and eat it. And we look at it in 3 different ways: by category, how the work gets done, and how the brand interacts with a target audience. So by category, for you all, it could be quality of life, it could be regionalism, it could be economic competitiveness. How are you making things happen? Your cog exists to improve the quality of life for this particular area. When we look at it through the lens of how the work gets done, you do it by convening. I mean, most all of you have said that: convening, facilitation, collaboration. That's how you're getting the work done, and that becomes part of your brand story. And then how you're interacting with your target audiences, there are a variety of ways you do that. You're operating as an extension of local and county governments. You're interacting with your brand audiences at those collaborative engagements through supporting regional efforts, through grant management. That's, you're interacting with your target audiences in those ways. by those convenings. And so making sure you understand all those nuances then can help you develop your brand position and understand that we are this regional resource. We are this resource that brings people together from perhaps disparate backgrounds or affinities in order to do something really positive for our region, whether that's economic benefit, or that's to help our aging population, or to bring jobs in. It all works together. And then you want to make sure that your staff understands that, but they also have those key talking points. And by audience, sometimes they need to know how to talk to an elected official, and only some of them should be doing that, or how to talk to the staff within the governments that they are interacting with. What are they saying to them? Because those folks live and breathe and vote and make sure that you're relevant at the end of the day. And then just making sure that you're sharing those talking points and messaging with your staff, so that you can really go below the surface and your staff is able to share that information about other departments with others. Do you feel like right now, if you asked your staff to talk about another department, would they be comfortable with it? Would they be able to do it? And if not, what do you think you could do to make that happen? I'm assuming you're all typing like crazy. Anthony, will you share a little bit more about that? You said, while we have worked on this, I think it would be a mixed result. What do you mean?
So part of that rotation that we do at our monthly staff meetings is we take a little bit deeper dive on each program, so that the staff and the rest of the building, if they're not working with that program regularly, have a pretty good understanding. That way, if they're asked about, hey, yeah, you work in transportation, what about the housing program? Mm-hmm. They would have a few points that they could speak for a few seconds about it at least, mm-hmm. and not be totally foreign to them. But we do that over a series of months, and I don't pretend to assume that all staff pay attention like they probably should and really absorb it all, but we do make that effort.
Yeah. Well, and it is hard. I mean, people are busy. They're all working on their own stuff. And so, no, they're not going to become experts on everybody else's department, but at least having a familiarity so that some light bulb goes off and they say, oh, wait a minute, I remember somebody talked about something related to housing, so that at the very minimum, they could say, let me connect you with this person. And we can take it from there. At least that level is helpful. And Scott, you said you think most staff understands the macro mission of most departments and can at least state 1 to 2 sentences. And I mean, I think that's a very positive thing. If you're, and I don't want to add too much additional work, some organizations do an internal email. That can take a lot of time to do. And then also, are they reading it, sort of thing happens. But I think as long as you're finding some manner in which you're sharing information with your staff and they are absorbing it, even if maybe it's a once a week email, somebody has a photo they took on their iPhone of an outing they did and a little snippet, here's what happened. That's some way to share something quickly. All staff get it. Maybe it needs to be vetted through you all, but I think that having some quick little ways to hear about some of the positive stories would be helpful. And then one of the really important things is just to stay on track. I know it gets hard when you start on something like this to keep momentum going and stay focused on it. I find that it's easiest to start with, let's just nail down what that brand story is, what our messaging and talking points are. Maybe you've gotten your logo updated and everybody understands it and it's disseminated, and then let's just stay consistent on that. And maybe there's one person that's in charge for making sure we're all staying consistent. And maybe it's you, maybe it's someone you're hiring, your communications person, maybe it's you'll have to look at your personalities, but you want to make sure you've got brand guidelines so you don't have this happen where somebody creates a mug that's completely out of character with your brand and starts handing it out. It's a small thing, but it is a pet peeve of mine when everybody sort of just goes rogue on their own email signatures, and they've got like purple font and some, little precious moments quotes in there. And I would love it, a real simple thing, make sure everyone has the same email signature. And if they are in a different department, make sure that department says a department of and your organization's name. Don't let that email signature go out with just that department on it. It has to be part of your signature. And I did take that mug from Dana. It is hers. Yep. So the key to it all, here it is, wait for it, consistency. It really is important that once you establish something, even if you say, I'm only gonna take on this part, that those 3 things that you have decided I'm gonna do, you're gonna be maniacally consistent with it. And you're not going to veer off and just go down a new path. There's got to be some thought to it. There's got to be some accountability with it, and making sure that you're holding up your end of the bargain as the leader and making sure you're consistent with it, but also trying to make sure that your staff understands it and they know where to find it. Is there a central point where they can find those talking points? Is there a central access point where they can make sure they understand the brand guidelines or the logo and they understand how to use it? And with things like public relations, is there one person that's allowed to speak to the media, or do journalists have phone numbers for all your department heads and they just answer questions whenever they call? I think you have to be very careful in keeping that consistent as well. All right, I don't know that I'm going to get a lot of action out of you folks when we have the discussion part here, but I'm happy to answer questions. I'm happy to discuss anything out of this that you want. What did we not cover? Identifying common mistakes to avoid. I think we did cover that. Making sure you've got some brand guidelines in place, making sure people know what the policies are with social media and with public relations. And I didn't hit on social media too much because I am doing that on Tuesday, but I think that making sure that people understand, if you don't have a social media policy, I would get one, and make sure people understand that when they are speaking online, and there's so much being shared right now on social media, that if they have your organization name and they're about, and it says, I work for Land of Sky, or I work for George Washington, like it or not, they are representing your organization. And you can't tell them what to say on their off time. You can't really control that, but you can just remind them that if they're going to put that in their about, then it could reflect on your organization, good, bad, or ugly. I had a client that shared something online not too long ago, and it was a week of me trying to do damage control. It was not the client, it was somebody that worked for the client. And it was not fun. So, at a minimum, tell them to take your organization name off their Facebook account. And note, I am not speaking on behalf of my organization. These are my personal opinions. Somebody had asked a question, email signatures, about including pronoun preferences on them. Anthony, not in my conservative region. Asheville. And Martha saying she's seeing pronouns and signatures for most everyone here. And I do think this is a case-by-case basis. Yes, Stacy, pronouns are helpful, especially with names like yours. And hopefully I didn't call you the wrong pronoun. it is a case by case. I think you have to know your region. I think you have to know your community. Okay, good. Whew. You have to know how's that going to be received by your elected officials. How's that going to be received by your other folks? And then again, with your brand story, are you sticking your flag in the sand on this and saying, we're going to be a leader in this arena? We are going to be the one that is fighting for rights for everyone. If that's your jam, yes, do it. If you want to remain that neutral body, you might want to consider just figuring out, is this going to be appropriate in our region? Are we going to offend folks? It can be helpful though, like with different names. I'm seeing it a lot. We haven't started doing that here, but I am seeing that a lot with some of my clients. Any other questions? Left it up to individual staff preferences. I think that's fair. I will say with that crisis situation I referenced earlier, one of the first things that I did was write a memo to the staff from their leader to explain, acknowledging that they knew this was happening, what the steps were, and basically saying we as an organization need to move on. There was a memo to the board, a communication to the board, because your board always wants to know, how am I going to get attacked? Who's going to get upset with me? So the more you can arm them with information, the better. And then a prepared statement for the media if they asked. And then you just kind of tuck your head and wait for it to move on, because people have a short attention span. Nathan, yes, our region is a mix with all sides of the ideological extreme, for sure.
Hey, Erica, I'll ask a question by audio.
Okay.
So I think in our region, we already have branding issues. I don't think there's really any question about that, but I feel like at this point, we're sort of pretty internal facing because I think we've got some internal issues we need to work out before we really go off into the public realm too much. But I'd like your sort of perspective on that. I'm pretty risk averse, and I would rather not shine the light on us until we're ready. But I also don't want to miss the opportunity really and fall off the map in the process. So, any guidance there?
Well, not knowing exactly what your internal issues are, it might be a little difficult for me to say, but if you're feeling like your internal issues are such that if you start exposing yourself in an external manner, it could be problematic, then I would say go with that intuition and work on getting your house in order first, and then begin to move externally. There's no harm in, there's never any harm in getting your plan together first. I think having a strategic plan, at least understanding when we speak, this is what we're going to speak about. When we want to share something, this is who's sharing it, and this is the framework within what we're going to share. I think that's good to work that out as you're working on your internal situation. But I think if your radar is saying it's best to work on those internal issues, I would respect that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? I'm going to start calling on people, especially those I know. I see Kevin Bird on the next screen there. How are we doing, Kevin?
Slam busy right now. Sorry. Fires putting out on Friday.
I understand. I understand. Kevin, can you share how did it help your organization when you were able to tighten up your brand and have more of a consistent voice? How did that help?
Yeah, so it made a tremendous difference in the consistency of what we were doing across the organization. anywhere from job advertisements to working with public, many media releases that we're doing, our board packets. I mean, everything is so much more consistent now. And, last year we had our 50th anniversary celebrations. So you all did a quick redesign for our logo and messaging around that. Yeah, just the overall consistency, I think, has just been so helpful.
And having done your annual reports for many years now, we're always impressed with the level of your stories and how they've evolved and the work that you're doing. And I think you're doing a lot of outreach, it feels like, and a lot of partnering and telling that story more often, it seems like.
Yeah, definitely. The annual report piece that you all just finished up for us is fantastic. And we still struggle as an organization of trying to get people to write less and give us outcomes. So then working with your team, we're able to do infographics that people are going to digest. We're getting people there. It's probably been like 3 different iterations to try to shorten it. And, I think that all starts back when we're doing our monthly newsletters of having just 4 to 6 sentences on projects that people are actually going to read versus the 2 or 3 paragraphs. And then that feeds into our annual report. But it's that makes it easier too. I think when people see that when we come to annual report time, we're not asking them for new content. We just want them to truly focus on outcomes. And yeah, we still have a couple of program areas where that's challenging, but for the most part, it's helped a ton. It's gotten a lot more digestible.
And that's a good operational view there is, engaging your staff and your team in developing your annual report and making sure you're communicating about your successes. And I promise that was not a plug for us to help you with your annual report. I know that just looking at Kevin's annual reports has been interesting to see the evolution. So thank you for sharing that.
Well, it definitely takes coaching. So thank you. And I appreciate it.
I will always say less is more, especially with annual reports. So I have a question from Jeremy Holmes. How important is outreach to non-traditional media now that newspaper and television operations are shrinking? In other words, seeking guest blog posts, niche magazines or online video, podcast, etc. I think it's very helpful to do that if you have the time and the bandwidth, and it's not going to take you away from reaching the traditional as well. I think you have to do a little homework on who the audiences are for some of those non-traditional outlets, making sure that you're not setting yourself up to be attacked or have unwanted attention. But I think it's often really helpful. One of the tactics that we use for a client is to offer a guest column every week, and then another one, a guest column every month, to keep our client's voice out there and relevant. So you could easily do a guest column where you're talking, you have to do it in a way that's not promotional, but maybe you're talking about the ins and outs of transportation planning or aging services that you're offering, or how to help your aging neighbor during this time in COVID. Things of that nature where you're offering content and it's not actually self-promotional, it's helpful and of interest to the community. As we've said before, a lot of the newspapers have shrinking staff, and so they appreciate having something to fill the space. But to do that successfully, you need to have an editorial calendar on your end and go ahead and map out who's writing what at least a few months in advance. So, a week before that column is due, you're not scrambling to find a story. Look at some of your older content, look at something that you already have had to report on to your board, or you've had to report on in a newsletter, and then repurpose that so that that's easy to do. And you can do your own video information as well and share that online. You can certainly, podcasts are very popular. It's making sure, again, it's the right venue for you and it's going to serve your ultimate goals. Of that answered. Thank you, Jeremy, and thank you, Kevin, too, for participating. I called you out. Sorry about that. Kirk, would you name a few cogs with refresh logos so we can have staff get some ideas? I sure can. Land of Sky. Yours is a few years old. We have New River Valley, Buckeye Hills in Ohio, Southwestern Commission, South Carolina COGS. I'm trying to think of some other ones. High Country COG, rebranded last fall. Western Piedmont Council of Governments logo is still fairly new. Any others that have rebranded lately? We have a new logo and newish go by name. You do, Martha. Tell us about that switch to that new name.
So in Virginia, we are required under code to be legally named a planning district commission, a regional commission, or there's a third one. I know Kevin remembers what it is, but it's pretty specific what we're allowed to be called. So we didn't change our legal name after much gnashing of teeth and me asking the right questions of our legal counsel. We got our board to approve that we can go by Plan RVA, the regional commission, which kind of just helped us. RVA is a really big part of lots of organizations branding here in the area. So shortening our name definitely helps, just answering the phone with writing and all that kind of stuff. And it helped to, we hope, invoke a little bit more of a kind of a fresher, forward thinking, accessible name instead of our Richmond Regional Planning District Commission, and you know, this connotation in our region that was like a regional land use authority or something like that, which is would not be desirous of anybody in our area. So it's been pretty successful, and it was an opportunity for us to leverage our 50th anniversary and reintroduce that name and logo and kind of make a new commitment to the community that we're about public engagement and equity. So we're still kind of figuring out all of the nuts and bolts of how to live into that, but that was the idea.
I like it. And how did you roll it out, and how did you communicate about it when you shifted?
I mean, we hosted a small event that was kind of a thank you to our commissioners commemorating our 50th anniversary. Due to budget and some other things, we didn't really do what some of the other PDCs were able to do with kind of a bigger community-wide event. But we did do that, and we launched our brand with that. And then we just did kind of a series of press releases. And then really we've taken it more kind of grassroots. We do not have, like Anthony has, a dedicated marketing professional, and we don't have like a contract in place with a professional firm. So we've been really going to community-based organizations and telling our story and using it as almost like an input tool to say, you know, this is what we're trying to accomplish. How can you help us get our name out? What's effective for your constituents? That kind of thing. That's been actually pretty cool. It's been a bit more manageable than what we might have tried to do in kind of a massive rollout, but it's been like those one-on-one conversations, trying to just systematically build alignment with other community partners. And then, I mean, I would say it's paid off tremendously during the pandemic, because we had a pretty aggressive public engagement strategy for our long-range transportation plan. And it was all based on getting out into the community in person, which hasn't been possible here. So because we did that legwork over the last 1.5 or 2 years with our partners, they have been able to leverage their name recognition and kind of trust in the community. And like, we're seeing, I won't say close to statistically significant, but we're seeing drastically higher levels of participation in our online surveys and shares, and you know, those kinds of metrics where you can kind of evaluate whether there's a buzz. And we actually have gotten picked up in a couple of the more kind of the less traditional media outlets, which has been exciting because they never even knew who we were before.
Yeah.
So
I think that's outstanding. And I'm always a fan and prefer the ground level, boots on the ground, grassroots sort of approach like that, because it's going to be more sustainable than if you just did something splashy and had a lot of paid media. It's not going to make the same impact that those efforts make. So I think that's really smart. And timing it around 50th anniversary, that's always good to do. and making sure that, one thing we've done in the past too with a rollout has been to identify brand ambassadors within the community, send them a little goodie bag with talking points and a suggested social post and saying, at this time on this day, please take a photo of yourself holding up our new logo or something like that, and congratulations. And that then creates buzz as well. So good job. Any other questions or thoughts? Anything we didn't cover that you want to ask about? Sorry, Kirk, overwhelmed with the number of COGs you went through. Yes, we'll post some links to those COGs. I'll send a list to Anthony and Martha, and maybe you guys can share that out.
Yeah, we'll get it to Jim to put in the email with the recording to this.
Okay.
Maybe,
Yeah, thank you.
we'll plan on posting the presentation as well on the website. So maybe if you just want to add a slide with those, Erica,
Okay.
it could be on the end of, the presentation.
Okay.
For that.
And we do share, just so everybody knows, the chat log. I think there might have been some links that people were putting into that too, so we can send that out.
Absolutely. I think that's great. Anything else? I'm curious to know how you all have adjusted during COVID. Are you having more community meetings via Zoom? What's your participation looking like? How are you dealing with all of that?
So we've done reasonably well. We have lots of meetings. We're not having very many in person in terms of committee or board meetings and that sort of thing. We usually host this Western North Carolina Air and Water Quality Conference and in person in conjunction with our local private university, and we had to go on virtual with that this year, and it actually turned out really well. We had like close to 300 people attend virtually, which was way more than what we typically average. So there've been some positive results, but there's certainly a lot of virtual meeting fatigue out there as well. So we're
Amen. Yeah. I do feel like though there's going to be a change in how everybody does business moving forward. And like you said, you got more participation. Sometimes people would prefer to be anonymous and not turn the camera on, not show up, not have to drive, not have to get dressed in the appropriate attire and attend that meeting. So yeah, it'll be different. But yes, I think we are all a little fatigued with Zoom. But thank you for playing along with me today. I appreciate it. And I still have a few minutes. If you have any questions, I'm happy to stay on. But I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you and share some of the tips and things that we've learned along the way, and hope it's been helpful for you.
Thank you, Erica. We appreciate you taking time to do this today. Appreciate everyone's participation. And I think it's been very informative, and I know the subject has been valuable to our organization and the approach we've taken. And I feel like we've been successful with it. And I know a number of you also have, and I know a number of new executive directors walking into their situations the last few years with a lot of turnover. So a lot of directors are walking into situations that they're trying to develop a good list of things to do to improve the organization. And I would say that this is a key area to focus on in terms of demonstrating your value. And I think in eras past, it was the mantra to just do the work and be in the background. But I think in the circumstances we all find ourselves today is that we're probably not being very good managers and stewards of our organization if we're not demonstrating the value that we provide to organizations. And that's not bragging. That's just being a good steward of your organization and taking care of your organization. You're bragging on your staff and with the value that your communities can have and accomplish together in your organization. So thank you, Erica. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Again, there will be another session on Monday that Martha will be kicking off for us. And we hope to see you then. Jim will you have the calendar invite for that meeting, and he'll send a reminder out either over the weekend or Monday morning. So thank you, everyone.
I think that's Tuesday, right?
Oh, Tuesday. I'm sorry. I misspoke.
I will not be there Monday.
Yes, Tuesday. Yes, you're correct. Tuesday.
Okay, good. Thank you, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Take care.
Bye-bye.